Okay, so tonight we're going to continue our discussion. We're still in the same malacha. The malacha is called the Av malacha is called Dosh, but this malacha has a lot of applications. So last week we spoke about what is exactly Dosh. It means threshing. How are we able to peel our fruits and vegetables? Right. So we had that discussion. We said it's all about because it's really a preparatory activity. It's not about an eating activity. So peeling our bananas, peeling our oranges, right? That is not in a preparatory stage. That's really just part of eating. And then we spoke about um, you know, those who have to milk the cows on a farm, or women who have to nurse. So that was really our discussion. Those are all related to Dush. So tonight, what we're going to talk about is you know, juicing, squeezing fruit. That because that's also relates to Dosh. And then I think probably get to next week will be our last year about Dosh. That's about like squeezing other stuff. Let's say you have like a I don't know, like maybe it's like a towel, you squeezing out the water. Is that Dosh? Maybe yes, maybe no. Um, so those so that's kind of the plan. But for tonight, talking about squeezing the juice out of fruit. So why does that relate to Dush? What does that have to do with Dush, right? Dush is threshing. So Rabbi Ribiat explains squeezing is related to Dush because the juice is being extracted from the solid fruit in which it was previously absorbed, in the same way that grain is detached from husk. The pulp or the meat is the word he uses of the fruit, like the meat of the fruit being a solid, is useless wherever a liquid form is required. Hence, the juice with respect to the meat of the fruit is similar to the peas vis-a-vis their inedible pod. The squeezing process is thus equivalent to extracting a separate entity from its casing. This activity involves the basic elements of the malacha of dash, and there is therefore a tolda of dash, which is called mefarik, like extracting, squeezing. So he says it's similar, very much related to the idea of removing a kernel from its husk. So the thing to know with squeezing fruits is that there's different activities of fruits. This is the main thing to know. That there's three different categories of types of fruits. The first category is the most strict. Those are the fruits that are prohibited midaraisa, biblical level, and they're gonna have the most strict rules. That first category, the only fruits that are in that first category are grapes, right? So if you would squeeze grapes or olives, that's it. And no other ones are in that category. Those are the most strict for grapes and olives. The second category is fruits which you know could be made into normal for it to be juice, right? But not necessarily all the time. So let's take like an orange, for example. It's normal for people to squeeze their oranges and drink the juice, orange juice, but it's also normal for people to eat an orange. You could just snack on an orange. So that would be the second category. And then the last category is fruits, vegetables that are never really normal for you to squeeze to turn into juice. So like maybe like a cantaloupe. I've never heard of anyone doing a cantaloupe juice, but maybe people do it. But I'm pretty sure that would be it's something that goes into the last category. Okay, so now first we'll discuss the first category, then the second and the third. So first category, the things which are prohibited on a biblical level, Isser Deraisa. It's just grapes and olives. The Gemara says that explicitly. The Gemara in Shabbas on Kuf Mem Hey 145. It says there are only two things which are obligated on a biblical level. One is grapes, one is olives. So the question is, why just grapes and olives? Why are they treated separately than every other fruit? So Rashi explains, this is Rashi's approach. He says um, in order for it to be prohibited on a biblical level, it needs to be something which is normal. So if it's not normally squeezed, then it's kind of like you're squeezing something in like a weird fashion, or it's like you're not really doing anything. You're almost like it's if you're like cutting a fruit in half, right? You're not really changing anything. You're just eating less of it or in a different way. So the only fruits that are normal to be squeezed, he says, are grapes and olives. That's Rashi's approach. And I don't think I don't think even Rabbi Rebbe didn't even quote this approach. So I think it's the less typical way of understanding. The more typical way of understanding is the Ran's approach. The Ran is another one of the Rishonim. He explains that grapes and olives are different because when you squeeze a grape and you squeeze an olive, you're not just getting um you're not just getting like the juice of a fruit. It actually you're getting a new creation. You squeeze a grape, you can get wine. I mean, you get grape juice, but you also get wine. If you squeeze an olive, you're getting oil, right? Those are things which are new creations and have a certain level of importance. And in fact, the Ran says that the Torah gives higher levels of importance to the thing that comes from the grape and the thing that comes from the olive than the actual fruits themselves. Like wine and oil have more importance. So therefore, right, that's so therefore to those are going to be treated different from every other fruit because the thing that's most important about um the grape and the olive is what comes from it, and that's done by squeezing. So that's the Ron's approach. Grapes and olives, only grapes and olives are going to be prohibited biblically. But because that's true, there are few halachas related to Dosh, um, which require stricter laws when you're dealing with a grape or when you're dealing with an olive. So this one, Rabbi Ribby has a safer, but I'm not sure if everyone agrees with this. But he says it's preferable not to even cut up grapes or olives on Shabbos. Why? He says if you're going to cut a grape, you're going to cut an olive. Inevitably, some of the juice will come out, and then if you're some of the juice is coming out, right now it's like you're squeezing juice. You're squeezing juice from a grape or an olive. And we just explained that that's going to be if you would squeeze juice, you would squeeze juice from a grape or squeeze juice from an olive, that would be a biblical prohibition. So he says you don't want it to come into a question of maybe doing that. So he says, but let's say if you know, if you want to feed a grape to a child, you have to be very, very careful. You can't give a grape to a child, you have to cut it up. So what should you do? So he recommends um cutting, he says if you cut a grape on a napkin, so then none of the juice would accumulate, and then that would be okay. I think Mecha Versa he asked Rav Shechter, he said do we have to be machmir like this? And I think Rav Shechter said he's not really sure. He said he wasn't really sure where Rabbi Riviat was meant by that. So, but it's something to be mindful of, right? That grapes and olives are treated differently in halacha, and perhaps you should be careful when you and avoid cutting if possible. Um, right? Obviously, if it's a question of safety, then you have to make sure to do that. But that's one way it could be relevant. Another way where grapes and olives are treated differently is that the halacha is that juice, if you had juice that would seep from a grape or an olive, on its own. Let's say for example, you had a very large bowl of grapes, and you had a bunch of grapes in there, and you just was left standing on Shabbos. So any juice that seeps out from the grapes on its own, the Shulchan Aruch, he writes this, that you can't drink that juice on Shabbos. And he says that's true even if, they're table grapes, because apparently there's grapes that are specifically made or specifically grown for wine. And then there's grapes which are specifically grown to be eaten. But he said that's true even if these grapes are just table grapes, they're not meant to be squeezed and turned into wine. He said still, if it come out on its own, you can't drink that juice. The Gemara in Shabbos says that juices of grapes and olives that float out on its own accord, Shabbos are forbidden to be used on Shabbos. And this was the reason is because the concern is you might start drinking the juice that comes out, and then you're going to want some more, and then you're going to end up squeezing grapes and olives, and that's a Isser Deraisa. Um, Shulchan Aruch does right though. Let's say you had this bowl of grapes, and it was producing a lot of juice on Friday, right? And then you kept it there on Shabbos, so it's still making more juice. So he says, okay, but if the overwhelming majority was filled up with grapes that juice that came from grapes, that came out on Friday, then it's batel, then it's nullified in the rest. Um, and the Be'er Halacha also says if the grapes were already crushed up, let's say the grapes were already crushed up before Shabbos, then and then it started like coming out, then it's also permitted to drink from them because they're crushed up. Halachically, we view them as if they're already squeezed. Okay, but that's about grapes or olives, right? The key is you want to know what's the Isur Deraisa, it's grapes or olives, and be careful not to squeeze them, not to get any juice from them. And even if juice comes out from them on their own, you should not drink it. Okay, what about the second category? Right, that is all category one. What about category two? Right, other types of fruits that might be normal to squeeze. So so yeah. So first, so the Gemara in Shabbos says this comes from the Gemara in Shabbos. The Gemara says that it's prohibited to squeeze grapes and olives. Right? We know that already. You can't squeeze grapes and olives. Like Gemara says, it's permitted to squeeze uzradin. That means crab apples. So that's permitted. But then the Gemara says, but it's prohibited to squeeze pomegranates, um, and berries, tutim verimonim, pomegranates and berries. The Gemara says, why? Since the house of Menashe bar Menachem would squeeze pomegranates during the week. Meaning we can't squeeze pomegranates and berries since there was this house that did them even during the week. So the Gemara says, okay, but they weren't normal. No one else did that. Most people seemingly did not squeeze their pomegranates for pomegranate juice. So why should squeezing pomegranates be prohibited? Seems to be the Gemara's question. So Gemara says that we have this principle called ach sheveh. Ach sheveh means like you're thinking, you like treat it. It means the very fact that you're squeezing the pomegranate indicates that you're treating it like a drink, right? Why else are you squeezing it if not for the juice? So by the very fact that you're doing it, that means that you think that this produces real juice. And the Gemara says that's why it's prohibited to squeeze pomegranates and berries for its juice. The question is though, if there's something called achshave, which means, like considering it as important, which means, every time you squeeze a fruit for its juice, it means you're treating it as a fruit, which is really produces a drink, which would mean every time you do that, it should be prohibited. So the question is, how can there ever be this third category of fruits, which the Gemara already mentions, right? The crab apples. How can that there ever be a third category of fruits which is permitted to squeeze? Since you're squeezing it, right? You seemingly you want the juice, so that should also be prohibited. So there are different ways to answer that question. Rashi says, yeah, that's true, and really those crab apples would be prohibited if you wanted the juice too, because Rashi understands that really the only thing that matters is if you're squeezing juice, squeezing something because you want the drink, that makes something prohibited. The Rashba has a different approach. He says, no, squeezing something on its own does not create a prohibition. It needs to be something which you're squeezing for the juice and something which is normal to juice. But the Beis Yosef, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, he has a different approach. He says that it's all about. He says the Gemara really doesn't even listen to doesn't really even hold like that. That was the Gemara rejects the idea of something called achshaveh, something about making something for the juice, and the Gemara really just meant that really was that Beit Menashe was a really a significant part, and it was a big town. So Beis Yosef holds that it's all about if a significant community juices its fruit. So there's basically three different approaches. Rashi says we care about if you're squeezing it because you want the juice, that's prohibited. The Rashba says it has to be normal and you have to squeeze it. And Beis Yosef says it's all about if it's normal. So what do we do with that? How do we paskin? So the Ramah, he says that in a place where they squeeze certain fruits to make juice, so he says then it's going to be treated like pomegranates, and therefore it's going to be prohibited to juice them on Shabbos. Meaning wherever it's normal to squeeze the fruit, then you can't squeeze the fruit. But if it's not normal in your place to squeeze this fruit, then you can. Right? That sounds like the Beis Yosef's understanding. But the Magen Avrami says, if anyone in the world really juices this fruit and you're juicing it for the juice in the drink, then it's prohibited. He says it's not really about the town, it's really about if it's normal. So meaning if somebody somewhere in the world takes your fruit and turns this into juice, right? Let's say like a pineapple, right? You probably don't drink pineapple juice, but somebody somewhere sells pineapple juice. You could buy pineapple juice in the store, right? So therefore, it's going to be prohibited. So the Mishnah Berurah says, therefore, we cannot juice anything on Shabbos, basically, because nowadays there's probably somebody somewhere who juices it. By you juicing it for the juice, now you're treating it as important. You're doing achshaveh and it's prohibited. It says with one exception, which we're going to get to, which is going to be lemons. We'll see why that's different. But Rabbi Ribbiad, he writes, right? He says, okay, what's the halacha? At the end of the day, what's the halacha? He says, although berries and pomegranates are the only fruits mentioned in the Gemara, all fruits or vegetables that are commonly pressed for their juices and enjoyed as drinks are included under the second category, the Derabanan category. This is true even of fruit juices that are produced in certain countries or cities. Exotic fruits may not be squeezed for their juice if it is known that they are used for the juice in their native land. Right? Most fruits and vegetables are commonly pressed for their juice and are therefore similar to grapes and olives, which are also used primarily for their juices. Because of their similarity in this respect, many people might fail to distinguish between grapes and other fruits. To prevent this confusion, squeezing all such fruits for their juices was rabbinically prohibited. Included are, he gives some examples, oranges, lemons, grapefruits, apples, pineapples, cherries, strawberries, pomegranates, and tomatoes. So that's the second category. But the key is that this is, you know, it's a little confusing how we got there, but it's prohibited on a rabbinical level, right? This is not prohibited on a biblical level. It's a rabbinical level. And because of that, there are several leniencies when it applies when we talk about this second category. So number one, right, we talked about juice that seeps out on its own for grapes and olives. So although we have to be strict about that for grapes, the uh the Shulchan Aruch, based on a Gemara, he says that for this second category, if juice seeps out from its own, it is permitted to drink. Right? The Shulchan Aruch says that's talking about strawberries, berries, and pomegranates. Per Rabbi Ribbi, it says likewise for cherries, strawberries, pomegranates, grapefruits, oranges, tomatoes, any other fruit or vegetable designated for eating. Right? If those juice drip out on its own, then you can drink them. But this is with one very important caveat that the Shulchan Aruch writes, if the fruits were meant for juicing, right? If you had a fruit which you plan on juicing, right? Let's say you wanted to make orange juice. We'll go back to orange juice, and you left those oranges there, right? And your plan was always to make orange juice, and then juice came out on its own, right? So until now, we think, right, juice came out on its own. It's in the second category. I can drink it. So Shulchan Aruch writes, no, if the fruits were meant for juicing, their status is basically like grapes and olives, and the juices may not be drunk. That would be the one caveat. But in normal case, juice that seeps out on its own, we're more lenient. Another application where they're more lenient is the Ramah writes, he says that he quotes a machlokes. He says, one opinion is that it's prohibited to suck the juice out of a grape. You're holding a grape. Can you're removing the juice, you're doing the malacha, but you're doing it with your mouth, right? So one opinion is that's prohibited. The other opinion is that it's permitted. The reason it might be permitted, even though you're taking juice out of a grape, which we said we're very strict about, is because it's not really normal to get juice out that way. So that's true about grapes, right? But doing this with all and olives, but doing this with other fruits, that's going to be permitted. So if like you wanted to suck on a lemon, I have a someone related to me who likes to do that they like to suck on a lemon, so that would not be a problem. Mission Brewer says to suck it out while it's still in your mouth. If you put a grape in your mouth and suck out the juice, says that's even for a grape that's permitted because that's just called eating a grape. It's not prohibited to eat a grape on Shabbos. That's not a problem. But they're talking about a case where you're holding the grape in your hand and sucking out the juice like that. Like that's the machlokas there. But again, that's just grapes and olives. For a lemon, for an orange, grapefruit, that's not a problem. A third application is, let's say, I don't know why someone would do this, but this is the application that if you want to squeeze a fruit to soften it. So like Rabbi writes, he says it's permitted to squeeze apples or these fruits for the purpose of improving its texture or taste and not to extract the juice. According to many poskim, one may intentionally remove the juice from these fruits if the purpose is only to remove and discard the undesired juice. I don't know, maybe you're eating a grapefruit or something and it's too juicy. You want it to be less juicy, so you want to just squeeze the juice out and do nothing with it, right? You want it to just be on your plate so you can eat. I don't know. I'm not sure what the I'm not sure why someone would do this, but i- regardless, for the second category, all those fruits, that's permitted. And then lastly, for this second category, um, this actually I think people might do is you can put a lemon slice, for example, into a glass of tea and allow the juice to seep out on its own. Where the juice is going to seep out its own, you know what's going to happen, but you're not really doing it. So for this second category, that's that's going to be permitted. So that's categories 1 and 2, right? Grapes and olives, the most strict. There, you have to even be careful about juices that come out. Second category is pretty much all normal fruits that you would want juice from, besides grapes and olives. And you have some leniencies there, but squeezing for the juice itself, right? That's squeezing to actually juice it for the juice itself is prohibited, but there are a lot of leniencies if the juice comes out on its own, or if you're not really trying for the juice, those things are going to be permitted. And then the last category, which is other fruits. So this is what Rabbi Ribbiat, he defines this last category. He says fruits and vegetables that are rarely, if ever, pressed for their juices are permitted to be squeezed even for their juice. However, these are very few since most fruit juices are very popular. Moreover, fruits that are not regarded as juice fruits in one country may still be halakhically classified as juice fruits if that same type of fruit is commonly made into juice in another country. Right, that was the discussion we were having with above, right? So some exceptions do exist, he says. Most varieties of melons, for example, are not popular anywhere for their juices and may be squeezed. These include cantaloupes, honeydew, melons, and watermelons. I've seen watermelon juice though, so I don't know. But cantaloupe juice I've never seen. Honeydew juice, no, but watermelon juice I think I've seen. But that this is what he puts as this last category, right? And so anything that would be in this last category, you could even juice for the fruit. And finally, we'll end with this last discussion. So the Rush, just to give you a reference, is Rav Asher ben Yechiel. He lived in from 1250 to 1327 in Toledo. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because this is what he says. He says, juicing this fruit called a lemon into an empty bowl, he says, is permitted since lemons are the third category, since nobody juices lemons for a drink, nobody ever turns lemon into a drink. They're just used for flavoring. So you can even squeeze a lemon for its juice, right? That's what he says. Because no one juices a lemon for their juice. So the Beis Yosef, I don't know exactly when the Beis Yosef lives, but I think a couple hundred years later. Um, so he says, I heard that there are these people in Egypt, they do this thing where they squeeze their lemons into a drink, they add some sugar, you know, they add some ice. Oh, so the Beis Yosef lived 16th century. So yeah, a little bit later, right? So he said he heard that there are these people who take their lemon, squeeze it, add some sugar, add some ice, add some water, and then they drink it. It's called lemonade, right? We know what that is. So he says, and they still do it on Shabbos. He says, I don't understand. How can they do it on Shabbos? If they're gonna do it and they want the juice, right? That's the second category. You can't squeeze the second category. I mean, there might be some situations where you're able to squeeze these juices, right? Or drink the juices that come from it, but you can't just take these fruit and squeeze it for their juice on Shabbos. That's Dosh. So how can they do it? So he says it's two answers. He says, number one, maybe you could say that Chazal, the rabbis, they only prohibited fruits that can be drunk on their own without adding anything. But if you squeeze lemons, um, you can't just squeeze a lemon and drink the lemon straight. That's not a drink. That's he said that's gross. So that's maybe that's why. Number two is that every single time they juice the lemons, they would juice the lemons into water and sugar, and Chazal only prohibited juicing into an empty cup, right? So they would always juice their lemons into water and sugar. So Shulchan Aruch, he paskins like this. He says it's permitted to juice lemons. You could take lemons and juice it into an empty cup. Um, the Mishnah Brura, right? The Mishnah Brura, he lived much more recently. So and the Shemir Shabbos Kelchasa. So that's basically written based on Rosh Shlomo Zalman's rulings. These are much more recent. So they write that there's two reasons. One is that squeezing lemons on their own you can't drink that. And number two is that every time they squeeze lemons, they do it into water and sugar. So the second reason doesn't really apply anymore because sometimes they're gonna juice a lemon into an empty cup. You can buy just lemon juice, right? You can buy lemon juice. People do stuff with lemon juice. So that reason is not going to apply. But he gives you a leniency. He says, though, it is permitted to squeeze a lemon. You have to remember from last week, says why this is permitted. He says it's permitted to squeeze a lemon onto a solid, right? Because if you're going to squeeze a lemon onto a solid, right, the argument was based on the Gemara that what have you really done? You're basically turning a solid into another solid. You haven't actually extracted anything. So you can squeeze a lemon onto sugar and then you could put it into your tea. That he said, and that's true of other fruit too, right? That would be true about oranges, whatever it is. Um, so that's that's what the Mishnah Berurah says, and this is apparently a big discussion. I guess a lot of people used to want to add squeezed lemons into their tea. So it says that that's totally mutter. Likewise, you'd be able to, but if you wanted to squeeze a lemon into your salad, you'd be able to do that as well. Squeeze a lemon onto a salad. That's not a problem. So this is a little bit of a machlokas among contemporary poskim, what to do. The Yalkut Yosef and the Aruch HaShulchan, so that's based on Avadia and the Aruch HaShulchan, they say, yeah, it's permitted to squeeze lemons. End of story. You could just, I think he's saying that you could even squeeze the lemons and just drink it. They don't even need to do the solids. He says the primary heter of the Beis Yosef is the first one, since it's inedible to drink on their own, so anyone could just squeeze lemons. But then you have to the opposite extreme, which are the Chazon Ish. He says even to squeeze a lemon onto sugar onto a solid, is not, and then to put in your tea, that's not going to help you because you're not really doing it for the sugar. You're doing it for the drink, right? You're squeezing lemons into tea. You're just trying to trick yourself. So he doesn't even like that. But yeah, that's basically a discussion about lemons. Um, and yeah, so okay, we'll stop there. And then next week will probably be our last share about this malacha of Dosh.